All right, welcome everybody to Satsang, and this is Thursday, February 26th, 2026. And so today I wanted to chat a little bit about I put a piece out, and we're going to go through that. And what it's about is the what I call the realities of Advaita, or the heart of Advaita, however it is that you want to look at it. And there's a really good, I'm going to go through a chapter. We'll start with that. And then I have one little paragraph from I Am that I was going to go through, and then the piece that I wrote. And this is going to take us back to the sense that is out there that Advaita is mainly an intellectual engagement, and what it is that the other traditions bring into play, actually, that lives at the heart of Advaita itself, that a lot of times it's just simply overlooked. And so they get at it in a number of different ways, but I'll take my shot tonight, and then this one may come up a fair amount. So, what several visitors notice after listening to Maharaj for some time is that he rarely uses the word love. I'm on chapter 38, by the way, in Pointers. I just started it.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Um, in his exposition of the true nature of man, in fact, he often says that in the process of manifestation of the unmanifest, there's nothing religious or devotional as such. Um, should a visitor specifically ask Maharaj whether love had no place in what he expounds, he would smile and ask a counter question. What do you really mean when you use the word love? You're going to see he has a pretty specific. The significance, what significance does the word have for you? This question would generally make the visitor speechless because this word is one of those which are hopelessly misunderstood and freely misused. Maharaj would then continue, does not the word love basically signify a need of some kind? For you love the person or the thing that satisfies your need. Indeed, the love between a man and a woman satisfies the need of each other, whether the need be physical, by way of companionship, or in any other form or manner. When one finds that the other no longer satisfies the need, love first turns to indifference and later on, perhaps, to hate. Why do couples change partners, wedded or otherwise, so often, particularly in the West? For the simple reason that they no longer seem to satisfy each other's need as they did earlier. So see how he frames up. He frames up love in a very egoic way. One visitor who wanted to pursue the inquiry further asked some questions. He says, but sir, this is definitely a narrow view of the word love. There must be something like impersonal or universal love. Maharaj, let us be clear what we are talking about. Are we talking about a sentiment, a relationship between two persons? If so, can love really be anything other than the interrelated opposite counterpart of hate? Both being feelings that one person has for another. Such a relationship can only occur in the dualistic manifestation of subject-object. If, however, you are thinking in terms of nominal non-manifestation, which is the state of total subjectivity without the slightest touch of anything objective, something that can only be suggested by the subjective pronoun I, total unicity, which can only be conceived only as a state of fullness, wholeness, holiness, no words can be adequate. So here he goes. So when you take a look at why he doesn't speak of love a lot, it's that his experience of love, let's say the felt experience, is such that there are no words for it. And of course, in that state, a love-hate relationship would be quite inconceivable. Relationship between whom? So if therefore you are using the word love to indicate the nominal state, this word, like any other, would, any other word, would be totally inadequate. Visitor says, honestly, I had not considered the matter so deeply, so analytically. Perhaps what I had in mind was something that is conveyed in the words God is love or love is religion. Right? So you hear that used a lot. Maharaj laughing. Here again, my friend, what are these but combinations of words based on someone else's concept, which he liked and wished to thrust on others? And the others are more than willing to accept any concept that gives them some sort of moral moorings. In such cases, the seeker is happy and complacent in his pose of the seeker. He feels so much superior to others, misguided souls who are wasting their lives. And in this pose of enlightenment, he is happy to hang on to a concept based on a pleasing combination of words that feeds his seeker ego. So you can see how he looks at the dual state. But Maharaj, the words God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him, were used by St. John, a great Christian saint who was also believed to have been a Yoni. Maharaj, I do not doubt that he was a Yoni, but unfortunately, there does not seem to have been a clear apprehension amongst his followers of what these beautiful words meant to the Christian sage who uttered them. What St. John had in mind was certainly not that God as an objective phenomenal nature whose essential nature is love. Right? Not what he had in mind. Now let us go back again to what I told you about need being the basis of love. Consider what is the most priceless possession of any sentient being. Going to take you right back to the bottom here. If he had no choice of possessing, if he had a choice of possessing all the wealth in the world or his beingness or consciousness, you may give it any name to add to the thousands that have already been heaped upon it, that which gives him the sense of alive and present, and without which the body would be nothing but a cadaver, which would he choose? That's pretty obvious. Obviously, without consciousness, all the wealth in the world would be of no use to him. This beingness, this conscious presence that he is the beingness of every sentient being on earth, the very soul of the entire universe. And indeed, therefore, this here now, this conscious presence cannot be anything other than God. Right? It is this which one loves more than anything else because without it, there is no universe, no God. This, therefore, is presence God love. He kind of does the little three words with the little hyphens in it. And St. John was obviously very much conscious of this when he said, God is love. It is very clear that all he could have meant is that he, John, and he, God, were not different as pure subjectivity, right? And therefore, he who is anchored in the conscious presence that is love, that is God, dwelleth in God and God in him. Right? So he gives you the entryway now to that sense of presence. Now, what's interesting is that you think, well, this is a pretty esoteric kind of a concept, right? To take a look at the dual nature of love, the love hate, the opposites, and then not speak a lot about love, but with a recognition that in its essence arrives wordlessly, right? So, but but I'm here to tell you that in a lot of avenues of life, this recognition lives, right? So I used to work in the corporate world, and one of the things that you deal with a lot is what we call executive presence, right? Because great leadership is based on executive presence. And one of the fascinating things about it is you take away the first word executive, and what you have left is presence, which is exactly what he's after. And so one of the things that we used to do was we used to do a work in an area we called original myth. And the concept of original myth is this, is that, when you come when there is an arrival of a body mind, that it has a certain makeup, right? And that makeup carries with it an inevitable story were it to, were it to come out. And then we also recognize that the very nature of a child is the first thing that child will do is tell stories, right? So that this original myth and the storytelling of the very first storytelling, the birthright of our engagement, right, was around this sense of presence. And what we would do is we would have these folks find a story in their own life that really felt like who they were. Go find the story in your early life that reflects who you are. And then we would have them tell the story to the group. And then we would have them take that story, that sense that they felt when they told that story, and we would have them insert that sense, if they could, in every communication and presentation that they did. Isn't that interesting? Think about it. In a certain way, we were taking them back to exactly the same place using a bunch of different words and concepts, right? Advaita doesn't really play well in its natural state in the corporate world. It's not really, consciousness and I am and a lot of that kind of language, but in a real language because they knew, right? They knew that leadership was presence in their world, no matter how their world was organized. When the sense of presence was discussed, they wanted that, right? They wanted that presence. So all I did was go, oh, I think we can devise a way to get to that presence. It was fascinating because I wrote a book called Awakened Leadership, um, and of course, anybody who read it that had an Advaitic background would chuckle because the Advaita is in there, right? Most corporate folks that read it had no clue, but you can see that entire that this entire book on corporate leadership was based on Advaitic movement, as it were.
I especially liked your intermission.
Brad wrote a piece of poetry, so the book was organized in a set of biographical stories, and then there was some actual kind of leadership pieces, and in between I put an intermission.
It was a
And
goofy redneck song lyric
yep,
about
yep,
this guy on a tractor who out of nowhere suddenly becomes enlightened and he can't handle it. And it's but he's into it, but it's just more than he can handle.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Anyway, go ahead.
so so anyway, I mean, but so when you look out there, notice that there is a motivation to get to presence, and presence is the beginning of the wordless, right? It's the first step into ineffability. Um, Now, very few folks are going to raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm headed towards ineffability." That's probably not what you're going to hear. But the reality is that the motivation, there's an intuitive motivation that that's the place, right? So here's an interesting little piece out of Nisargadatta. This is in Love. Life is love, and love is life. It's chapter 22 out of I Am That, and it's just a single paragraph. Um, he says the inner is a source of inspiration, right? Another wordless word. The outer is moved by memory. The source is untraceable, while all memory begins somewhere. Thus, the outer is always determined, while the inner cannot be held in words. The mistake of students consists in their imagining the inner to be something to get a hold of and forgetting that all perceivables are transient and therefore unreal. Only that which makes perception possible, call it life or Brahman or what you like, is real. Right? So right back to that same piece. So one of the things that I really notice in today's holding of Advaita, Pepper. of Advaita is the sense that Advaita is this kind of brittle intellectual space. And so I don't know if you read the little piece, I think some of you did, but I want to walk through it because I think when you when you look at life, the pointers that are happening in the world that we're working with, we're always seeking to create balance. That's what our goal is. So I think that the sense of tangibility or consciousness can't be understated. So recognize that when I speak about this, that there is an already existing sense of what it is that we're working with when we're working with the intellectual path and pointers. We talk about pointers, but we don't talk about pointed to what. And and so to me, the hard piece is to continuously remember that ultimately it's the tangible but wordless is where the journey is headed. All right. So I start out and I go, Advaita is often misunderstood as a dry intellectual exercise, a philosophy of negation, not this, not that, a dismantling of concepts, a relentless insistence on you are not this, not that. Because of this emphasis on clarity and discrimination, it is sometimes assumed that the path is primarily mental. This is a mistake. Advaita has been characterized as being thin, dry, intellectual, a philosophy for sharp minds, but not for burning hearts. All right. The accusation is understandable when the teaching is reduced to negation, neti neti, when everything is dismissed as illusion, right? When even consciousness itself is declared temporary, the mind can clutch the teaching as a concept. All concepts are bloodless, right? Now, remember what I said about balance. So, when teaching is reduced to negation, when even consciousness is declared temporary, or everything's dismissed as an illusion, right? Whereas the embrace of that illusion, right, so to speak, the scene of it is an illusion. In other words, that it begins and it ends. The illusion is that we think it's real, that it has no beginning or no end. So that's the insert. That's the balancing piece, right? But it's not a broad statement on the whole affair. But the accusation misunderstands the matter entirely. Advaita without heart is not Advaita. It is argument. Let us be clear. When Nisargadatta pointed seekers to the simple sense of I am, that's where we were just living, right? He was not offering an abstraction. He was pointing to a living flame. In I am that, he says, stay with the sense I am, the feeling of being, right? I am is the feeling of being, right? I know who can define a feel. Even when you define a feeling, you know where that goes, right? Feeling, not theorizing, not analyzing, feeling. That felt sense of existence, and you hear me use that term a lot, felt sense, right? Feeling, felt sense. Prior to qualification, prior to story, right, is not an intellectual position. It is immediate, intimate, warm. It hums. It has a tenderness to it. It's closer to devotion than to deduction. The problem is not that Advaita is dry. The problem is that the ego prefers dryness. It can survive there, right? Think about the egoic. What does the egoic do? It uses lots of words, lots of concepts, lots of establishing, lots of talking, right? That's the egoic sense. In fact, we had a State of the Union address, the longest in history, 2 hours and 47 minutes. Lot of ego dryness, I would say.
Are you suggesting that Donald Trump is egoic?
I'm just taking an outside shot. And I'm sure that if I do, I'm the first one that thought that, by the way. Okay, it can debate non-duality. It can quote scriptures. This is the ego, right? It can reduce the absolute to a thesis, but it cannot survive surrender. So think about the traditions, right? So, like leadership, where you take folks to the bottom, right? The spiritual traditions, a lot of those that we all came from, right? Those are surrender-based movements, right? That's the lifeblood of this. Bhakti, devotion, is not opposed to non-duality. It is its perfume, right? The separate self survives through contraction, through tension, through the subtle insistence, I am the one who must understand. Bhakti loosens that contraction. In devotion, the imagined center bows. Surrender, right? Whether devotion is directed toward a form, a guru, or the impersonal absolute, its function is the same. It undermines self-importance. The ego cannot survive surrender. Just that simple. When the sense of I am is rested in without qualification, something unexpected begins to occur. The mind grows quiet, not through the suppression, but through intimacy. One falls in love with simple being, not as an object, not as a deity, but as the undeniable fact of presence. That's what Nisargadatta said. Osho used to make the comment that old couples, he says, you go sit around old couples, and he said, nobody ever says anything. He says, pure love, right? A lot of relationships over long periods of time, right? Relationship is, by the way, a lot of people, use relationship. That's the recognition that you are I and I am you, right? And it's also part of the seva mentality, right? Seva, which is surrender, service. Service is surrender, by the way, right? This is devotion without a devotee. Nisargadatta Maharaj said, to know what you are, you must first investigate and know what you aren't. But the investigation is not merely mental, it is total. It touches fear, attachment, longing, resistance. It exposes the emotional investments that hold the sense of self in place. Bhakti addresses these investments directly. Devotion melts what analysis cannot penetrate. And you remember that famous quote where Nisargadatta says, there is a place to which the mind cannot go. Right? And we see that's one of the quotes you see often, the Nisargadatta quote. Then, it's interesting. I went and I was with Osho. So Osho is a squeeze the lemon kind of thing, right? Tantra. Tantra too has been misunderstood as indulgence or exotic ritual. In its essence, it is the refusal to reject manifestation. It is the recognition that the same consciousness appearing as body, sensation, relationship, and the world is none other than the absolute. To squeeze life like a lemon, as Osho would say, is not to affirm the ego, it is to refuse division. Right? So notice we call manifestation, right, the illusion. Right? That's the balancing of the bike, the balancing of the pointer, right? But once balanced, you hear the term, that a yoni is a mahabhogi. A mahabhogi is an enjoyer, right? Who enjoys to the absolute highest possibility. The embrace of what is the mahabhogi. So, so remember that when you're working with this, the mind wants to classify manifestations bad or manifestations the illusion, right? Why do the pointers label it as such? Is because we don't pay any attention to anything but that, most of us, when we arrive to go, what's up? I know there's something inside of me driving towards something, right? So what's seeking? Osho used to have this beautiful thing. He says, seeking, he says, is like jumping into a bottomless chasm. He says, and the only thing that you can do is you hurtle through the air. And as you see your companions flying back and forth, you can just simply look at them and say, hey, so far, so good. That's seeking. No idea what we're after, right? No idea what the hell it's about, but we've jumped into the chasm. That's a seeker, right? So in that sense of things, right? Remember what got you in the air. It wasn't the conversation about what manifestation, about what was illusion. It wasn't that conversation. It was this idiotic impulse that was driven without words to jump into a bottomless chasm, right? That's what happened, right? Now, I know when you ask somebody why they're a seeker, they've already gone back and created the story as to why that's the case, right? But there's no story there. That's not how that was. It's just not. And if they look at the bottom, they'll see that's the case. The magnetization, the attraction of presence, the intuitive knowing that something's not right until that loop is closed. Jump into a bottomless chasm, fly through the air, and the only thing you know, so far, so good. That's it. All right. So Tantra approaches function differently, but towards the same end. Tantra does not reject embodiment, it penetrates it. Instead of denying sensation, energy, and experience, it enters them fully and reveals their impersonal nature, right? Not mine. That's not me, right? Because there is no me, right? That's the story of me is simply a story that holds a fictitious as if. I use the term as if a lot. So as if we act as if we were an entity. Ramesh uses the term entification, right? So that's what ego is. It's an entification. It's the entification process produces the state of I act as if I were a autonomous decision-making entity, right? When sensation is experienced without ownership, when energy moves without a controller, the body mind is no longer the prison. It becomes transparent. Advaita says you're not the body. Tantra, Tantra reveals the body's not what you think it is. Both dismantle identification. If everything is that, then nothing is excluded. Right? Same. I remember Ramesh used to say, in the subject-object world, it's all subject, or it's all object. Either way. He would say that. It's all subject, and and those of us who've been around, we knew. Or he'd come, he'd pause, and everybody thought he was done. He wasn't done, right? Even Ramana Maharshi, who's held up as the epitome of austere inquiry, right? Who am I? Radiated a palpable softness. Those who sat in his silence did not report philosophical brilliance. They reported peace, warmth, a dissolving. Now remember that Ramana in his early days was 13 or 14, I believe, just sat in a cave, didn't say a word. And people would just simply come into the cave and they would sit with him, right? It was a wordless satsang, right? No words. And they would come day after day after day. In fact, he was so taken by that that they had to take food to him and convince him to eat because they were afraid if he didn't eat, he would die. Right? That's how consumed he was in that cave of his. And that's the story of him being consumed. When people started to hear it, they started to go sit with him. That's all they knew. There's a fellow who's sitting in a cave, and we have to take food to him to keep him alive. But he radiates. And people would go sit with him. The heart-centered approaches are not add-ons to the teaching. They are necessary solvents. Earnestness itself, right? The quality that Maharaj insisted upon is not intellectual rigor. It is a longing, a fire that cannot be distracted. That fire is devotional by nature, right? The driver, right? So what happens with a lot of these traditions, in modern days, the Tantra, the Bhakti, the Seva, is that the sense of the egoic structure, it gets lived into the egoic structure, right? That's kind of the joint understanding. When I was in the ashram, the idea that we weren't that we would hear it, but it was almost impossible. So we spent a lot of time really engaging in all of these things, but we clearly knew that we were egoic, and we wrestled with a lot of things egoically. That was the nature of being in the ashram. And what Advaita did when that was introduced was it kind of popped the top. It became the missing piece of years of being in an ashram. It was like, you could see it, but you didn't leave it. You didn't leave the devotional, the squeeze it like a lemon, the visceralness of life, right? All it was a new egoic, non-egoic structure that allowed you to see that you had been living what was intended to take you out, but you'd been living it into the very thing that you clearly had identified as the issue, right? And so it just opened that can, right? When the seeker refuses to turn away from the question, who am I? When the question burns hotter than personal ambition, that's bhakti. It may not be directed toward a form, but it is devotion to truth. Here's your devotion. Presence is not a sterile awareness floating above life. It is the intimate contact with what is. To be present is to be undefended, to feel fully without the story of ownership. That undefended openness is vulnerability, and vulnerability is of the heart. See, we keep getting back. Even consciousness itself, the great pointer of Advaita, is not a concept to be admired. It is the living field in which love, grief, joy, and silence arise. When one recognizes that there is no separate entity managing this field, compassion naturally flows, not as a moral virtue, but as a fact, right? And when I say a fact, I mean a lived experience, right? So there is no other, and when there is no other, how could compassion not arise? So to say there is no doer without the softening of the heart is to weaponize the truth. To say that the world is appearance without reverence is to misunderstand the miracle of appearance, right? So these aren't things meant to put someone in a place of, basically thinning out the herd, so to speak. Well, I can get rid of it. I get rid of manifestation. I get rid of experience. No bueno. Those are out. No, not the point, right? The point is to open up what already is. That's what this is about. See, the absolute does not need devotion, but the apparent human expression dissolves through it. The absolute does not need tantra, but the resistance to life falls away through it. The absolute does not need earnestness, but the seeker's illusion does. Advaita is not thin, it is vast. There you go. It includes negation and embrace, silence and song, inquiry and surrender. In the end, even those distinctions collapse, right? So now you go beyond the I am, right? The I am is the sense of presence of all of creation, right? That's that. So God is presence, right? But even God, in essence, gets transcended, right? These distinctions collapse. There is no bhakta, there is no tantric, no yani. There is only the seamless happening of life, intimate, immediate, and unowned. And if that is not love, what is? right? And that's the end of the piece that I wrote. So to me, the balancing that we so often work with, right? It's always going to be the introduction of the new part that adds to what already is. That whenever you hear a pointer, remember that's what it is. Now, Nisargadatta was an incredible kind of a clarity guy. So um, he didn't speak a lot. He would speak about balance, but usually it was at the back end of everything. Because when he taught, he really leaned in to making sure that the what it was that one had never been exposed to, but that would give the final piece when added to everything that was already there. He leaned into that very, very, very much. Ramesh, as clinical as he was, he actually didn't lean into it quite as hard, so you would hear him speak about balance a lot. Like in other words, this is why this is happening, right? So what happens is that the ego is always ready to do discarding. It loves to discard, right? So when I say that manifestation is an illusion, oh, manifestation bad, discard, right? That's the discarding. So we're at that place in the process here where the recognition of the new has already happened. All of us who sit in this room have had incredible amounts of exposure to all of the Advaitic pointers. Well, at least the ones, the majority of the Advaitic pointers. I'm sure there's some I don't know about, but nonetheless, we have. But to take that and to make that the catechism and discard the very wordless nature of ineffability, which includes all of the lived pieces, right? The experience, the felt experience pieces, for which we then cobble together paltry pieces of word salad to explain, right? That certainly isn't what we want to reject or discard. Eject, you use whichever word. Go ahead, Brad.
I'll keep this short because it's more about an experiential thing for me.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, experiencing all that is, any way you want to put it, presence, it's like a hum, only it's a feeling. It sort of hums. It has, you know, and it's subtle, but it's powerful. And I just notice when I feel that I'm really dialed in, and I like that it has a humming quality to it. It's always like a it could be a 60 cycle hum, and like it doesn't even matter, but it's some kind of a hum like that. And I can feel it affecting the body and the mind, and it's very joyful, man. It's very joyful. I love it.
But and I mean that's really interesting you brought it up because that's a beautiful way to bring it up
Yeah,
that every body mind is constructed in the way that it is. Right.
yeah,
So, has everybody here heard about neuro-linguistic programming? I think we
yeah.
probably all have.
NLP.
Right. So all it does is it kind of says, "Hey, look, some folks are visual,
Yeah,
some folks are auditory, and some folks are kinetic or feeling based,
kinesthetic. Yeah,
kinesthetic. Sorry.
yeah,
So, it's funny when you start to look at folks, you can kind of take a test and figure that out. But most of us would know, right? And it turns out I'm kinesthetic,
yeah,
right? So you're always going to hear feeling words out of me, right? I'm a storyteller. Why? What's embedded in story, right? Feeling, right?
yeah.
Feeling can be embedded in story. It's very difficult to read a paper on philosophic deconstruction and get much of a feeling sense out of that.
Or even much pleasure.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed it, but for a different reason than the fact that it felt good. Yeah, Heidegger is not a feel-good read, I'm here to tell you. So, even though he does use the term Dasein, which is being, but that's about as good as it gets. The rest of it's pretty dry. So,
Wow.
but nonetheless, remember that the descriptions of what it is to be in the felt experience, I would call it a felt experience, right? For some might be the seen experience, for others might be the heard experience, right? And so what you're describing is this most amazing piece, right? That's the announcement for you of that presence is in play, right?
Yeah, I love that, and it's you can pick up that hum in nature too. You know,
Yeah,
you walking
yeah.
through a forest and going, man, this place is humming.
So, so all I'm trying to point out is
Yeah,
that we have a habit of universalizing everything. And I didn't want to universalize what you said because for you, that's how that happens.
yeah,
So the key is to find your version of that because
right.
it
Yeah,
will make itself apparent based on the way you're constructed, you're
yeah,
composed, right? Your composition will bring that out, right? Look, I just used NLP as kind of a way to see that
sure.
possibility.
Yeah,
So the question is, what is it? Right. And I think that's what we're all driving towards. Right. But don't do the, Brad said that, so that must be what it is. That's not what's going on here.
that's what Brad thinks.
That's well, no, but that's Brad's felt experience. And
Oh
so it's
yeah, yeah,
incredibly authentic and beautiful. Right.
yeah.
So what's what's your body mind's version of that one?
Yeah,
Right.
but
Because all the radar and the equipment and all of that's it's in there the way that it's in there.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So comparing experiences, that's why the pointers are are the way the pointers are when you see them, but they don't um, predict an experiential outcome,
yeah.
right? Because that's simply going to be a
Um,
lot of it's going to be how the body mind is
the
composed. Go
stuff that you
ahead.
wrote yourself, that you concluded in this
Yes.
conversation, um, is that posted somewhere? Because I like hearing your words like that, man.
I post that. I post it every. I'm going to. We this is the second week we've done that. Last week I posted a piece on Satsang, if you remember,
Yeah,
that we went through.
yeah,
And what that allows, I believe it's given an incredible freedom to the conversation because the I am that pieces, as you know, that was early Nisargadatta, right?
yeah,
The later Nisargadatta, which was more kind of an advanced version, if you will. But the balancing that I think is necessary in today's world, right, should basically be extracted from today, as it were, right? So
yeah,
that's where in that writing, all I'm doing is creating a contemporary version of similar commentary, right? That's all that's going on here. But it feels that there's a completion in it, so to speak.
yeah.
It gives us a bigger piece. So
Anyway,
I'll be
if I
writing I'll be writing one of those every week. I think Michael posted it on Tuesday this week. I think it was on
yeah,
Tuesday when it came out.
I'll go
So
take a look. But I
out
wanted to
on
have a
the
written
yeah.
version of that, so it would stick with
And
me better.
well, and he usually puts it in there like when he announces the sot song for the week. It's around that. I don't remember if
Okay.
he's posting or what, but yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
I post it every Tuesday. It's
yeah.
just if yeah, if you just hit the page on Tuesday, it'll be there on Tuesday morning.
Cool. Thanks, Michael.
Yep.
Mm.
So that's out there. All right, guys. Any more input, question? Do you I know it's only 45 minutes in, but I believe it or not, I was there's an intensity to this particular day or this approach that I love, but it doesn't necessarily yield itself to an hour and 15. It feels done in a shorter period of time. Now that might be because of the fast moving nature of this body mind. I don't know, but but certainly if there's any question or input, I'd love to hear it.
I'm
I
just
just
grateful to be
wanted
part of
to
this.
say, all right, go ahead, Brad.
I just said, I'm just grateful to be part of this. That's it.
Yeah, me too. It's great. I'm getting a lot out of it. And I just want to throw in my experience like from a few weeks ago, the just a quote from Ramesh that I am not the body mind, I am the animating consciousness.
Oh,
For
yeah.
some reason that really I felt like tumblers of a lock, like I had questions about like what if, I don't know about this, da, da, da. And that was just the key that slid right into all those things and turned for me that I'm still high on that. I am the animating consciousness. That like settled it and made me just feel like and now all this other stuff is just like icing on the cake. It's all really good stuff, but that one piece just really just
Pops.
fuels
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to, when I was 19, I went to Peru for 2 years as a Mormon missionary. And I can remember I used to sit up in the Andes, here I am, all of 20 years old in the middle of the Andes. And here's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm going, well, here's where I am, but what would have happened if I had arrived a minute earlier in this situation or that situation, right? Now that doesn't sound like a big deal, but I'm here to tell you that it occupied many months. It was like one of the most absolute, you know, overwhelming mind fucks that I had ever encountered. And so I remember that. So figure that out. So you just said animating consciousness. I'm going to guess that there's a background against which that sits. So I'm sitting, and one day, Ramesh says, "Oh, it all happens by itself perfectly, and it couldn't happen any other way." And I remember there was this, just like that moment you're talking about. It was like, boom, got rid of all of that time sitting in the middle of the Andes at 20 years old going, oh, this, this is just, it was just so much, all of the inputs in life, right? And that's why Ramesh's little thing was, go home, take 20 minutes, find the thing that you think you're most responsible for, right? And then look at everything that had to be present in order for that to happen. And when you see all of that, you're like, well, wait a minute, what if the fire truck had been by, exactly, a minute later or not, all of that, however, whatever those pieces are. And for whatever reason, that absolute frustration of thinking that when I was 20 years old and never coming, never coming. I mean, I'd sit around and watch life and go, it just never made any sense. That pointer kind of just, you could feel it at all. I went, oh, got it. Life completely settled in that moment. So that was my the same kind of a moment you're talking about, right? But it's just that against a little bit of a different backdrop. Yeah.
I had kind of a similar experience a few weeks ago. I went down to Rio Grande City, and but I spent a lot of years going to Native American church meetings.
Oh, okay.
Um, my family's part Native, so it was just sort of like very natural for me. But when the quarantine happened, I stopped going to those. So I got invited to go down there, and I went to the ceremony, and I mean it was a beautiful experience for me because it was just it had been a while. So I heard a teaching though that was given in there that I had heard. I've been to hundreds and hundreds of these ceremonies, and I've heard it hundreds and hundreds of times. And the teaching is it's all right here in front of you. It's all on the earth. It's the earth, the fire, the water, just the elements are right there in front of you. And so, it's not way out there. It's just, I always understood it intellectually. But after coming and reading the Nisargadatta and all the other things that I've done, I heard it and then I saw it. I don't know how to describe it. You know what I
Yep.
mean? That was
Yep.
like, okay, something really just settled. I didn't need it. I don't need anything fancy after that.
That's it. So, those are the pieces, right? And then what happens is a new noticing arises, right? Because it's all of a sudden it's all right there, right? Well, I don't know how you could help, but not having a new version of noticing when that part blows up, right? I mean, it's a revelation, but it's one that blew up the distance because intellectually there's always going to be a distance, and of course that blows up that distance, and now you are that, right? Not only is it right here, you are that that's right here. So the noticing becomes entirely different, right? So really for each particular person in their journey, those pieces flavor out differently, right? But ultimately that's the place that's the return when someone says welcome home, right? So this is not about adding, this is all about, basically wiping away what gets in the way of one's natural birthright. So if you want to use that terminology. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So, hey, Ron, do you want to comment? Ron had an experience this week, and something really shifted for him. Do you want me to tell the story, or would you like to?
I'm happy to. I'm laying on my back looking at the ceiling, so I'll just keep the camera off. But
Oh,
I
no
had
worries.
this I had this sense of completion. It just came through, and I started writing my experience down, and I shared it with Alan. But just my understanding of self-inquiry, because I've been doing it for a while now. And so what I wrote to Alan basically was, when you ask, "Who am I?" it seems to set in motion. It seems like an activation, for lack of a better term, but it sets in motion this internal awareness experience, however, whatever you want to call it. And when you ask, to whom do these thoughts and feelings come? Um, you know, at first, when I would ask that question, I thought I was actually in control of the inquiry. I thought that, oh, look how clever, I caught this moment, and I asked to whom these thoughts and feelings are coming. And most often it would happen during times of tension, and because I wanted to quell the tension. It was my way of just finding relaxation, because when I would ask to whom the thoughts and feelings come, immediately the mind was shut down. Whatever tension was there would subside, um, to whatever degree, and often it would take several inquiries. And then over time, I recognized that, oh, I wasn't the one inquiring. This inquiring is a happening of its own. I would lay down and go to sleep, and how the mind is active. When you go to sleep, and I would say, who are these thoughts coming to? And so it started just taking on a life of its own. And then the completion part for me was everything was just settling internally. And I started seeing how this inquiry process was living inside of me, and it was something to be observed, and literally to where there was nothing else to do. Like this inquiry got activated, it has been prolonged, and now it's settling internally in what I would guess call presence. And that everything's happening in life, all the movement externally is happening, but the lived experience is just happening on its own. And you realize, wow, I've always been lived into the moment. I've always been lived. But now I see it. And that sense that I have to seek anymore is just been just disappeared, and that I really don't have to do nothing but just be and observe life moving. And I wrote, and it just came to me in the form of a sense of completion where um, I'm satisfied. There's a satisfaction in that present moment, um, where nothing else needs to be done anymore. It seems, and this is still a movement in process for me, but that's pretty much the experience.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really beautiful. I'm glad you were willing to share that. So it really
Yeah.
does, if you think about it, like one of the really funny things, a lot of this, there's a form of hilarity that follows when you see it. So if you see that everything is lived exactly as it's going to be lived and it happens exactly the way it is, and you witness or you're involved in an argument, right? Well, the sense of the argument actually completely falls away, right? Because all the participants are simply being lived into exactly what they were going to be lived in. And it looks like an argument, but what it is simply consciousness living two body minds in ways that the ego can find conflict in, right? But there's really no conflict at all. That's what's funny about it. What looks like an argument, there's no conflict there whatsoever, right? None, right? And when that's seen, right, it's just pure comedy. Right. There's a lot of friction and a lot of sparks happening, but there's really no friction and no sparks. If it's just simply that's what it is. Either the body mind or the intellectual sense sees it, doesn't see it, who knows, right? But it all happens exactly as it's going to happen, and there's just a hilarity in the sense of separation and how separation lives itself in manifestation. And when I say separation, it's because that's how the ego sees it, right? It's the illusion. It's the ego illusion story is all it's overlaying onto, what life was going to do anyway. So in silence, if you think about it, I mean, it all arises and there's no conflict whatsoever. Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for that. I love the little pieces. Thank you for adding the pieces at the end. It really made it a beautiful night. All
Yeah,
right.
thank you so much,
So I will see you all next week and on Thursday as usual. I think we'll be in March, and then same thing. I'll pick out the pieces I'm going to work with next week, and you guys will see the article that or the piece of writing that appears on our page.
All
Thank
right,
you.
look forward to it. Thanks, Alan. Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Yeah.